thank you all for coming to the talk today. We're talking about Zhdun, which is a meme that is near and dear to my heart, and I believe to many people's heart. One thing that I think is immediately going to stand out is that this is sort of a happier, simpler meme, a kinder, gentler meme than a lot of the ones that we've been talking about so far. It's not overtly political. It's not angry. It's not offensive. It doesn't come from 4chan. It has no connection to incels that I'm aware of. So this is a rare moment of positivity with which we can celebrate Memorial Day. Also, by the way, I've decided next week's talk will be about the how should I describe them? The freak rave group Little Big. This was Nancy Condi's suggestion. You may know them from the Skibbity Challenge. So we'll talk about the way in which they do and don't fit with the questions of memes. So start watching your videos. I've gone down a Little Big rabbit hole all week, and I have a whole bunch of earworms that I'm trying to exercise. But they're good earworms. Anyway, so Zhdun, let me share the screen with you. Zhdun is a big fat blob. Zhdun is my background here. Actually, the original Zhdun is my background, but I'm going to give you the image here. This is an unusual meme for the purposes of this course, short course, in that its origins are very obviously and specifically not Russian, not Slavic. It started out as this actual sculpture that we're looking at here by a Dutch artist named Margriet van Brevoort, who installed a work that she called Homunculus Loxodontus at the Leiden University Medical Center, and this was in 2006. And she explains its origins to a Russian reporter. The fact that she's talking to a Russian reporter already indicates where we're going here. She says, I wanted to give it a scientific name like a new species. Homunculus means little guy in Latin, or artificially created human. And Loxodontus is the scientific name for African elephant, referring to the snout. I was commissioned by Belarus in Leiden to make something inspiring for the medical center in Leiden, and I didn't want to create something about medicine or illness, but rather about the patients themselves, the way they just have to await their fate in the waiting rooms, about hoping for the best. I wanted it to be a kind of lovable companion, something or someone that gives comfort, but also makes you laugh. In this building, there's also a lot of medical and genetic research going on, so the way the sculpture looks is a bit of a joke towards this research. It's like a failed experiment or product of this research that is hoping and waiting to get better, like a big, cute, partly human, and huggable lump of flesh. So that's straight from the homunculus creator's mouth. So far, so simple. It has nothing to do with the internet, nothing to do with Russia. It's just a local piece of art in Leiden. But in January of 2017, the photographs of the homunculus Loxodontus found their way onto Peekaboo, the Russian Reddit clone. And suddenly, the homunculus went from Dutch to post-Soviet Slavic. And I want to stress that though I'm talking about the Russian internet largely because that's what I know, one of the great things about Zhdun is that he really crosses the boundary. Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. Each of these three countries has its own name for this creature. The Russians call it Zhdun, from waiting. And in Ukraine and Belarus, they also use a root for waiting, the common Slavic one, Cheka. So in Belarus, it's Pochakun, and in Ukraine, it's Pochikun. And I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing this to any Belarusians or Ukrainians out there. But throughout the internet, it's most famous under its Russian name of Zhdun. So the meme starts in January 2017 and spreads so rapidly that the next month, a member of the Ukrainian Verkhovna Rada, the parliament, brought a stuffed Pochikun figure with him to the parliamentary meeting hall and parked him in front of a microphone. And so this was an announcement of possible ways of deploying Zhdun or Pochikun, ways in which you can intersect with politics, but ways in which you can still be rather lighthearted. And this has all been, it starts out being fine with the Dutch sculptor. I think she's happy with the attention. The next year she comes up with a kind of relative of Zhdun, this one over here. So she definitely has a mode going on here. So okay, these are great sculptures. They're wonderful. I'd love to have my own. But why was the image of Zhdun such a big deal, and why did it become such a mimetic hit? Well, the answer, I think, is rather obvious from the name that they give it and from the initial intent of the artist. It has to do with waiting. Here is the Zhdun waiting at a bank. There is something both universal about waiting, everybody has to wait, and something very post-Soviet and post-Soviet about waiting. The infamous lines, of course, that everybody had to wait in, the sort of general temporality of the Soviet and post-Soviet existence. And so a lot of the memes have to do with this idea of waiting patiently, because of course Zhdun is sitting folding his hands in that position that looks like, okay, I've camped out here. I literally have no legs. I've camped out here and I'm willing to wait. So of course, this being the internet, one of the first big crossovers that the Zhdun has is with a much more famous image used for waiting, which is the GIF of John Travolta from Pulp Fiction. I imagine you've seen this. He's put in everywhere, right? Just John Travolta looking around trying to figure out what's going on. So here, John Travolta is with Zhdun. You get a lot of Zhdun in particular local context. The chocolate bar Alyonka, which we already saw used in the coronavirus memes, here becomes Zhdunka. There's something about this chocolate bar that, by the way, that seems to spawn a lot of mimetic parodies. And then there's a particular phrase that Zhdun gets associated with, which is "Я что-то нажал и все исчезло." I pressed something and everything disappeared. I pressed a key and everything disappeared. So this is a phrase. This is a phrase that itself has a great deal of mimetic resonance. I think in both Russian and in English. I did a search to try to see if there's some specific source that I'm missing, and if anyone knows it, please do tell me of a moment when this phrase took off. But it seems, but in my mind, in some of the contexts I've seen it with, it seems to have to do with, in particular, like a newbie at the computer, often an elderly person at the computer, anxious, they press the wrong button, oh, and everything's gone, everything's disappeared. This is like a moment of tech support frustration, a moment that I've been going through a lot lately. And the fact that this was in the feminine also makes me suspect that there's something particular going on here, because Zhdun is usually seen as male, though there is a version of him that is referred to as Zhdunka that we're going to see as well. And as you can see from the image on the left, Zhdun is often dropped into various scenes. And this being Russia, into paintings a great deal. So Anastasia Denisova, who has a wonderful book about memes that came out last year, and I'd say half of it is devoted to Russian memes, mentions that the whole phenomenon of making memes out of classic paintings is not exclusively Russian, but particularly Russian, that Russians do this a lot more than other meme cultures that she's investigated. So of course we see this fairly often, first with historical images, in the meeting at Yalta, and then of course in art, right? Here we've got Magritte, we've got the famous painting of the merchant woman sitting at her table, and Botticelli, which I used for one of the announcements here. This version of Botticelli has the slogan, "It's time to act," which is particularly funny when it's with Zhdun, because Zhdun is not about acting. Matisse, obviously, and Mona Lisa, or as it's called here, Zhdukonda, a version of Zhdun that I think should be familiar to everybody, or the context should be familiar to everybody. There's also immediately a great deal of commercialization, or I would also almost call it etzification of the Zhdun. That is lots of Zhdun accessories that are offered for sale. Little Zhdun figures, a Zhdun plush toy that you can get on eBay. This is a Zhdun woman's sweatshirt, also available. I don't remember how much. The inevitable iPhone skin, and most puzzling to me, the Zhdun women's panties. I'm not even sure exactly what signal that's supposed to be sending, but there you go, or who is actually buying it, but it is available. In addition to the kind of Etsy, Kustarnik kind of thing going on here, there's a much more mass commercialization of Zhdun. Here is a bank card that I can't tell whether it's real or not. Frankly, I haven't looked it up. One could imagine it being available. One could imagine it being a parody. It says here, "Skoro zarplata," basically payday soon. Here is a a sign for new real estate. It says, "I'm waiting for the beginning of sales." So here, Zhdun is being used thoroughly for marketing. Here, there are a lot of people were saying that Zhdun should become the symbol of the Russian post office. And at one point, the head of the Russian post office got on the air and said, "No, Zhdun is the symbol of the old Russian post office, but now we're the new Russian post office, and we're not going to keep you waiting anymore." So he had to still engage with it. And my particular favorite is a International Women's Day poster here. It says, we are always waiting for you and we love you, the men of the Ministry of Culture of the Chelyabinsk Oblast, which is, I'm sure, warms the heart of every woman who ever looks at it. And once again, as always is the case with memes, and also even with these posters, one can't exactly know the intent here, whether this was just for fun or whether someone thought that women's hearts really would melt at this. Really hard to say. So why did Zhdun go so viral? Why is his image photoshopped into such a wide array of classic paintings, photos, and random situations? The common denominator in everything is waiting. And it finds its way even into, hold on a second, even into questions of politics, of course, waiting for the meeting to start. This is Putin and his ministers. This is when the former Prime Minister of Ukraine, Tymoshenko, was supposed to be meeting with Trump. Tymoshenko has the famous braid here. So here is her standing outside the men's room saying, "Is Trump going to be here soon?" And here is Trump himself as Zhdun. So what is going on here? So we have the stereotypes about the Russian people and perhaps by extension, Soviet people's legendary patience and the Soviet experience of standing in endless lines, enduring hardship. All of this seems to be a point of true commonality, and perhaps a reason that Zhdun can be claimed by Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus despite the obvious political divisions among them. Zhdun seems to require no particular political affiliation. The interview I quoted, where they talked to the woman who created Zhdun, was from Sputnik, which is a notorious Russian propaganda outlet. But there was nothing in that particular interview that cries out, "Here I am working for Russian propaganda." It's something that basically everybody on all different sides can get behind. But there are interpretations of Zhdun that are rather interesting. It's possible to see Zhdun as very much a creature of what was then, in 2018 at least, the present moment. Dmitry Travin writes that the conservative Zhdun thinks that the country's president has long been duped by government liberals, but now he has finally shaken them off and will accept an economic development program in the national interest. The liberal Zhdun thinks that the president has been long co-opted by the Siloviki and didn't understand how bad things had gotten in our economy. The young Zhdun is waiting for a change of elites and hopes to get a place in Gazprom. The old Zhdun is waiting for order to be restored, for the enemies to be destroyed, and for the USSR to be revived. So with the context of the various post-Soviet states here, Zhdun ends up both an identity that people are imagining and a kind of meta-identity, a way in which to think about, to position yourself in relation to what's going on in the state and what's going on in the world. The rare national image with which everybody can identify, but because he stands for the very problem that stands in the way of a stable post-Soviet identity. And the fact that the meme's origins are not even Russian, that enjoys just as much popularity in Ukraine and Belarus, it's not just ironic, but thoroughly appropriate. We have a cultural model of particularity, underscoring something specific to the local environment without isolationism. And the meme's success in all three Slavic post-Soviet nations is a reminder of a shared cultural core that is free from any kind of Russian post-imperial hegemony. Is the patient expectation of something else, which I think is really the key here. Something else, but something very undefined. Zhdun is a placeholder for that something else, for that other state of existence, state of being, and is well aware that its function as a placeholder is in itself representative of a state of suspension that has been better or for worse stable. That is, in a way, Zhdun, politically, one could see Zhdun as representing the 21st century equivalent of the age of stagnation, right? You know, when are things going to happen? And I find particularly apt this one image of Zhdun with Viktor Tsoi from Kino, where it says "Мы ждем перемен," which is from his famous Perestroika era song, we're waiting for change. And by putting together with Tsoi, it brings both kind of stagnation temporalities together, and suggests that maybe something big could be on the horizon. Zhdun only makes sense, not really in himself, but as the herald of whatever is coming next. And that's one of the reasons why I find particularly interesting something that Katie David showed me, thank you very much for that, by the way, about a statue of Zhdun being put out in front of former Ukrainian President Yanukovych's notoriously luxurious golden palace that is now open for people to come and see. By having him sit there, it suggests, well, okay, we have this horrible and beautiful and over-the-top thing that was hoarded by one person. Now you can come see it. It's available to everybody. And, what's next? Zhdun is also kind of a question mark. But a question mark for something that I think is inherently optimistic, because Zhdun, almost all the contexts for Zhdun are calming and reassuring rather than frightening. Zhdun would make a terrible forerunner of the apocalypse. Slouching towards Bethlehem. He's a placid and cozy couch potato, content to sit wherever he has been left and staring straight ahead until something new starts to unfold before his eyes. Now, I researched Zhdun a couple years ago when I thought he was going to be part of my Russia's alienation project, and now he's moved into memes, which is fine. He's happier there. I'm happy to have him there. But now in this new environment, when we're all sitting at home, I went to look for Zhdun again, expecting to find a lot of Zhdun coronavirus and lockdown memes, because, he's sitting around waiting. But I only found a few, very, very few, like this one. Когда живешь в Воронеже, узнал, что в Липецке уже кто-то заразился. When you live in Voronezh and find out that in Lipetsk someone has already gotten sick. And here Zhdun is now surrounded by tin cans full of food and wearing the mask. The idea of this panic when you find out about the virus coming somewhere that's not even really all that near you. But really, Zhdun is not a big part of the coronavirus mimetic ecosystem here. And so I asked myself, why? Could it be that it's just played out? This is a 2018 meme, and there's really not, and people are sort of done with it, though plenty of other memes either have lasted longer or get revived, like Carl from Walking Dead, for instance. Could it be that's too close to home? That is, we are all stuck sitting around waiting, and an image of someone sitting around waiting might not really be all that appealing. But I think in terms of contrasting Zhdun with the memes that actually have taken off in Russia during coronavirus, and that I think really does say something about what's going on. Because when we talked about the coronavirus meme, we spent some time looking at the isolation group from Facebook and elsewhere, where people throughout the Russian Federation are staging famous paintings using their own bodies and taking pictures, and they're beautiful and hilarious and fun and whimsical. It's, in a sense, they're already doing what did with Zhdun. There's this whole phenomenon that this is part of that we know in English too, of photoshopping images in. In Russian, of course, it has its own term, photozhaba, which comes from the Russian pronunciation of Photoshop. And there isn't a need necessarily to, or as much interest in putting this fictional person through all these Photoshop context, because the most compelling memes are people doing that themselves, and they're doing it in real life. They're actually not using Photoshop. They're doing this funny combination where the staging of it is analog. The people are really there. Then you take the picture, and then it becomes digital, and then it becomes mimetic. So who needs Zhdun for that? The other thing I think is that there's something almost inappropriate about emphasizing this calm waiting at this particular time, because the reaction could be, who are you to tell me I have to be calm waiting? I'm already waiting. Stop modeling for me how I'm supposed to be waiting. In a way, I'm reminded of what seems to be the opposite, but the whole thing that people get really pissed off on the internet, which is where we all are nowadays, with talk about, oh, well, you know, when he was in quarantine, Isaac Newton discovered the theory of gravity, or Shakespeare wrote King Lear, to which, you know, the natural response is, screw you, I'm not going to discover gravity or King Lear. Don't put this on me. I'm sitting around here. I'm helpless. And I think that's a very legitimate response to this kind of overcompensating idea that you have to be productive as all hell. But then reminding you that you're just sitting around like a couch potato might also not be particularly appealing. And I think of, in the English language context, so I suspect this thing has spread elsewhere, that the most one of the more compelling mimetic or viral reactions to the lockdown has been somewhere between the placidity of Zhdun and the rage sparked by being told that you're supposed to discover gravity. I'm sure most of you have seen this by now, but it's worth playing again. This now quite famous viral TikTok from a teacher. This is in English.
Hey, so as some of you guys might know, I'm a music teacher, and I found that one of the best ways that I can process the whole transition to online learning and teaching is to write a song. So I wrote a song. I'd like to share that with you guys now. Here we go.
So that has even made it onto TV, onto all the talk shows and all that. And that, I think, strikes a note that is a little bit more active and aggressive than Zhdun itself. But also, the optimism of Zhdun might be a little out of place right now. And this is why I think it makes sense that instead of Zhdun being the meme of the moment in the coronavirus, Zhdun who sits there, we have, of course, Natasha, who lies there and won't even get out of bed. So basically, Zhdun, by being vertical, is already going much further than a lot of us are. Whereas Natasha, are you sleeping, with the cats looking down on her, Natasha is going the full Oblomov, which is really much more, I think, appropriate to the times that we are in. That's all I want to say about Zhdun right now. I'm happy to take questions.
Great. Does anybody have any questions? I've opened up the chat.
Mm-hmm. I'm sitting here like just doing waiting. So.
Okay, so we have one question from Emily. Do you see any connection between cute Zhdun and this creepy meme from 2006? And there's a link.
Yeah, I'm opening it up right now. It sounds familiar.
Let's see.
I'm opened up to Doomer Girl. Hold on.
Oh, wow. Yes.
Hold on. Human dog hybrid hoax. Ooh. Oh. Right. Interesting. So the aesthetic is similar to the human dog hybrid hoax thing. That would really, the connection would, in terms of actual influence, that would have to happen really on the level of the possibly unconscious thought process of the sculptor who came up with Zhdun. I mean, my guess would be that there's something sort of readily available there if you start thinking about, if you start going away from the hard body to thinking about a very animalistic, lumpy flesh, and go in the direction of just like, let's let it all be as flabby as possible. And then I think it might converge somewhere on some wonderfully body positive homunculi. But really that would be a question for the sculptor. I have no idea, but they certainly look similar.
For anyone who didn't pull up the image, I can share my screen really quickly. Let's see, here it is.
So Lev Bernstein points out that there's a whole thing, oh, thank you, a whole thing on the internet with an obsession with fat animals, which is certainly true. Well, fat animals I think are often cuter, but now I don't have the chat in front of me because we're sharing the screen, but wondering if that might also have a connection. And I think there may be a connection, but I think in general, I would make the connection more with Teletubbies and Booba, which some of us are painfully familiar with. If you could picture, well, I think I used the Teletubbies as an example for somewhere, and even more Booba, if you've ever seen the version where the Teletubbies are dumbed down for people who don't get Teletubbies. They're absolutely pear-shaped. There's something that presumably children see as reassuring about this big, fat, possibly one might say maternal body, that we also can find cute and reassuring as long as it's not threatening in the way that people are very often in real life threatened by the fat female body and get very angry, when it can be not a human female. I mean, actually, Zhdun looks like the Venus of Wallendorf. When it's not a human female, then we can emphasize this warm, possibly maternal, cute, soft, squishy, huggableness that is cuteness. Not of Japanese cuteness, actually, not kawaii, but of an other kind of cute, of a I think very common form of cuteness.
Okay, and we have a question from Olga. There have been a number of Zhdun figurines made in Russia, specifically at the factory Gzhel.
Yes.
They made Zhdun as a Russian hunter, a balalaika player, and a soccer player. How do you interpret this intention to make Zhdun specifically Russian, especially if it is if he did not originate in Russia and is popular also in Belarus and Ukraine? And there are some links there to
oh, that's great.
If people want to take a look.
That is great. The short answer would be opportunism. Like, someone sees a way to sell something, and I think it's kind of brilliant. The longer answer would have to do with the ways in which in Russia, but not just in Russia, but let's talk about in Russia for now. There's a long history of things being imported into the culture and then becoming local and native. And I'm saying this not in this possibly Russophobic way of saying it's all about imitation, it's all about borrowing. All cultures borrow. I think people who bother to find out about it can know that Zhdun is not Russian, but it almost doesn't matter, right? Because Russia, the whole, I guess, the post-Soviet Slavic world made Zhdun the hit that it is, not the artist, right? And Zhdun, the way that Zhdun is deployed is not really about the. So in fact, I would say that there is something appropriate about marketing Zhdun as Russian, or also as Belarusian, or also as Ukrainian, because he has become that. I mean, I've long felt that there, as an outsider studying Russia, there's specific foreign things that I have to know Russian culture, even though they're not Russian. Like Carlson on the Roof, right? That is not Russian, but it may as well be Russian, and you have to know it. I read the entire Forsyth saga because everybody knew the Forsyth saga. No one here knew the Forsyth saga, right? So it doesn't matter. At some point, it doesn't matter that it started out foreign. It becomes so essential that it may as well be it's near native, as we would say in the language acquisition community.
Okay, and Alexandra, you had a question. I can unmute you now.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey. Well, Eliot, thank you again for a wonderful lecture. I have two questions that are connected. So the first one is about, as I was listening to you and looking at the fantastic, hilarious slides and the Zhdun meme, I immediately thought about another meme that even made a quick appearance in one of your slides, and I'm talking about the stoned fox, which
I actually didn't hear that.
I'm sorry. I'll just start over.
No,
so yeah.
Great, whatever the meme was, I didn't hear the name.
The stoned fox.
Oh yes, the stone fox, holding the stone fox.
Упоротый лист, да?
Yeah.
I think that's what it's called in Russian. So, which is I could send a link to the chat as when I finish. I'll send a link to the chat so everyone can view it. But what the Zhdun and the stone fox have in common is, as far as I'm aware, is that both were originally art objects, right, created by Western artists, and once they've made it on the Russian internet, they really took on, right? Russians really took them as their own, as expressions of some existential states. right? Of a particular existential state, each of them. The Zhdun is a representation of waiting, and the stone fox, well, once you see it, you'll see that it's a representation of many things, right? Of some kind of existential, what is it even? Doom, horror, endless shock, all of that at the same
Right.
time. So these existential states that Russians might feel, might relate to.
Yeah.
And that is really interesting. What I find interesting here is that how I don't see is, I think, yeah, how memes on the Russian internet work differently from the memes on the American or Anglophone internet is that I don't see a similar mimification of specific objects, right? I don't see Americans, let's say, take an object and make it their own, make it a representation of an existential state that everyone can relate to.
Hmm.
The way it has happened to with the stone fox and the Zhdun on the Russian-speaking internet. So I wondered about your thoughts regarding that. And the second related question, real quick, would be that well, the existential state of waiting is, well, it is an existential state that we all probably relate to, and we all can share, Russians and Americans and, well, Georgians, regardless. And yet again, I don't think I've seen a lot of memes related to waiting, right? That would be just as common, as massive on the Anglophone internet compared to the Russian internet.
Mm-hmm.
It's not to say that Americans don't wait in lines or don't wait, period. If you ever had to call a call center, right,
Right.
a support line, you know what I'm talking about, right? Or if you had to go to the DMV.
DMV.
And yet, right, and yet the funniest DMV joke is from the movie, well, the cartoon Zootopia, where they made a sloth, the DMV worker. Well, that's it. I'm done. Thank you.
No, that is great. I think actually with the second one about Americans and waiting, you kind of answered your own question in that Americans wait. That is an existential situation, but Americans don't tolerate waiting. Americans, this is where I picture, all the memes about like the entitled white woman wanting to talk to the manager. That waiting is something we should not have to do. And so waiting then, as a phenomenon that we hate, becomes site specific, right? It is that everybody comes is the first or second thing, and then tech support, calling in. Your call is very important to us. But I think in the American context, it's site specific, and it's also a sign less of this is what life is like, but these systems do not serve us well, especially if they're government related, because of course the government is bad. So that I suspect that would be one major difference in how waiting plays itself out on the Anglophone internet as opposed to the Russophone internet. The stone fox, absolutely. I saw him there in the corner of my eye, but I was busily assembling things and I sort of didn't really do anything with him. The thing about the stone fox is, like, in internet years, he's ancient. He's kind of dank. But he's also perennial. Whereas a meme, Zhdun just appears from nowhere, is everywhere for a while, and then just kind of settles. And I feel like, as appropriate for a stone fox, right? The stone fox, you come back a month later and the fox is still, right? So in terms of whether or not on the Anglophone internet there's the same sort of thing with finding an object and using it in this particular way, I feel like there must be. But when I think of examples, I think it's less actually about physical objects than about images from various media. But I don't know. I feel like there must be something similar, but I can't put my finger on it. And I certainly haven't looked for it. Was there another part of your question? I can't remember.
No, there's a great book. It's an ethnography, an edited collection that was published just a couple years back, and it's called Ethnographies of Waiting.
Right.
Of course, it has a chapter on Russia.
Yes.
Of course it does, right? Yeah, but so it has a chapter. Well, so it has chapters on waiting and various forms of waiting in different cultures. I can't remember if it has a chapter in America. I should go and check it. I have this book. Thank you again.
I'm gonna check that out too. I've heard of it, but I've never read it, and now I absolutely have to. Thank you.
All right. We have a comment from Lisa and Elizabeth. The picture of Zhdun in Sirov's painting of the girl with peaches could be a dig at comfortable complacency.
Sure, it could. I think it's hard not to be a dig at comfortable complacency when you're using that image, right? Because it's coded that way. And it very well might be. If that were the only Zhdun meme out there, I would be almost entirely certain of it. And I think it can be interpreted that way. But there is a kind of iterative phenomenon going on here where let's run it through certain paintings. And that one is memeified really, really often. It doesn't quite have Mona Lisa status, but it's up there. And so much more available, much more, I think, readily up there on the top of your list to turn into a meme. Then, well, obviously, if you're not from Russia, it would not be anywhere near on the list. So yes, complacency, but also possibly default. You know, we're going to use this meme.
And by the way, if anyone is looking for pictures of things that are being discussed, the Stone Fox meme is in the chat, and as are the figurines we were discussing earlier.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we have a question from David. Is Zhdun a non-threatening babushka?
Ha! Is Zhdun a non-threatening babushka? That is great. And it's fascinating if Zhdun is a non-threatening babushka, that a non-threatening babushka is a man or male, right? At the very least, I mean, actually, that is kind of the classic babushka position, like that slide I showed you a week or two ago with the babushki all on the bench. Though they don't necessarily give the impression of waiting patiently. There's more of a judgment of Nuremberg going on here. But I think at the very least, if there is a commonality and maybe some resonance going on with the image of the babushka sitting there, one of the things that the advantage the Zhdun has is that this whole set of gendered assumptions about what a babushka is, the ones that I've been invoking just now, don't automatically apply to the Zhdun. I mean, I say he, and the creator of Zhdun says he, and the gender assigned to Zhdun is he, though there's also Zhdunka and so on and so forth. But really, what is the difference between the Zhdun and the Zhdunka? You put, it's all about secondary sex characteristics. If Zhdun is a man and has primary sex characteristics, you're going to have to really go hunting for them. The fact that we assign, or that a masculine gender has been assigned to him, I think is part of a general process of seeing masculine gender as default, and therefore we don't have to really do anything with it. But then added to it the idea that the people who are supposed to be patient, the people who wait in line most, whose job it is to be patient culturally, historically, all that, is women. And again, we remove ourselves from the cultural assumptions here by making it male, but not overwhelmingly masculine. I think we can all agree that Zhdun is not macho. We won't see Zhdun riding with any cranes because he's not aerodynamic.
All right, and we had a question from Alice. I can unmute you now.
Hey, Alice.
Hey, Eliot, thank you so much. This has been really fun every week. And as you know, I also have a soft spot for Zhdun, so really appreciated this. You addressed my question a little bit, so I'm not sure this is going to be the most productive, but I love reading politics into things personally. So I'd love you to address the counterfactual of why Zhdun has not been co-opted more by political parties or actors. And is this just because of the optimistic tilt that Zhdun technically or generally has, or the everyman identification potential that you've talked about, or are there other reasons? We, of course, have seen Zhdun dropped into these meetings with Putin or in the Rada and things like that, but not really taking on a political position in any sense. So can you comment a bit on that? Thank you so much.
No, it's a good question. And by the way, this lecture was at Alice's request. I'd been thinking about it, but it got on the list because of her. So if you liked it, thank Alice. If you didn't, blame Alice. But
thanks.
Yeah, sure. This is a good question. And off the top of my head, I would say that I think Zhdun is just not a very good weapon for that sort of thing. The moment, like the image we had of Zhdun surrounded by the minister in the Putin position, or Zhdun as Trump, just being Zhdun, just putting Zhdun in a situation, I feel like it just drops the temperature or the pressure down so much, because Zhdun is kind of like a mimetic companion animal, and Zhdun does not seem to be there to get you riled up, and a lot of political memes and political propaganda are there to get you riled up, especially in the past several years in Russia, as we can see with the whole from Ukraine on. Zhdun is the best sort of way to, okay, you guys sort this out, or you guys get your act together. We're still here. But Zhdun, I think the greatest thing about Zhdun there is that even if Zhdun can be used politically just all across the spectrum, like that one guy quoted said, in a way, Zhdun is a great representative of the largely apolitical masses that you have everywhere, who are just, want to sit back, not, the ones, the non-invested voters, the ones who can't decide, like, is Trump better or Biden better? I just don't know enough, right? Like, the thing, so unimaginable to most of us, right? Because I assume most of us are kind of political junkies. So we are not representative. But Zhdun's out there thinking his own thing, waiting for everybody to calm down, and he'll still be there. So that's my reading anyway, but I don't know if it has any persuasive or explanatory force.
All right, and we have a question from Peter. Isn't Zhdun the ultimate anti-meme in contrast to all of the images of beautiful, successful, active people flooding the internet?
Mm-hmm. Well, there are plenty of images flooding the internet, not of that, absolutely. I mean, I take your point. I would say he's not an anti-meme, but he is, one could see him as very much anti that particular thing that you have, which is something that I particularly associate, say, with Instagram, right? Zhdun is the opposite of hashtag living your best life, right? Zhdun is not showing off. Zhdun is not making sort of duck face to make his cheeks look thinner. So yes, in the same way that you could think of Zhdun in terms of body positivity, though I think just that phrasing is a bit of a stretch, just given what Zhdun is. But anything that's about striving, anything that's about maximizing potential, Zhdun is the opposite of that. I think of when in the 70s, there was a huge, sentimental, sloppy hit book called Jonathan Livingston Seagull, which many of you might be familiar with, about a seagull who's just going to strive. It's really about a seagull. It's a picture book who's going to strive to be the best and be the fastest and all of that, and sort of ascend to a new state of being. By Richard Bach. It's awful, but it was one of the big hits of the 1970s. But what I remember reading that I think almost no one has seen, because it wasn't nearly the same phenomena. As a kid, I liked this book, but I also liked a book called Celebrate the Sun, about a character named Harry Langendorf Pelican. And this is a pelican who's basically saying, "Oh, dude, I'm just gonna sit back here and soak some rays, and you guys go out there and strive." I think basically he's the dude from Big Lebowski. It's kind of a stoner, which I think Zhdun could fit in very well. And that book was an explicit rejection of the striving in this new agey Jonathan Livingston Seagull thing, and that relationship is, I think, how I would see the relationship between living my best life, hashtag culture, and what Zhdun is giving you.
All right, and we had a question from Margaret. Margaret, I can unmute you now. Oh, yeah, great.
Great, thank you. Hi, Eliot, thanks so much. I wanted to follow up on Elizabeth Valkenier's question about the girl with peaches, the Zhdun in the Mamontov's dining room. And you said that it seemed kind of like a default, and that there were a lot of memes that were in that room. But it seems to me that to ignore the background and the resonance of that painting with Russian viewers, I would question the ignoring it, because if you could use another painting, it would have a completely different meaning. So if it means bourgeois complacency, like Elizabeth said, it is this idyllic country estate that was owned by Aksakov and the Mamontovs, and it's this kind of this girl sitting with fruit in front of her, like the cans of canned goods, whatever she had in front of her. So I would actually be interested in seeing a collection of memes on the girl with peaches background.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. Read, what does that background mean?
Yeah, no, that is great, and I think you're right. Of course, that meaning is immediately available. I think one of the reasons that this took off for this suggested that for Zhdun is also a kind of bodily silhouette resemblance that worked there as well. But I take your point. I think you're right. But I think that there's also still once something really takes off, there are a few paintings that they're just going to run through. And this one isn't quite that, but almost, and actually I haven't seen this, but almost everything goes through Nizhdali, right? We weren't expecting, or the letter. There's certain very classic like Russian paintings that they're going to find a way to put them in. And this, I'd say, would be like in the second rank of those, but still up there. So you're right, we can't ignore the meaning. And I think the meaning is there, but I think there's also a little bit of a reflex going on with it. Now, if it takes off and it's resonating with people, yes, I think part of it is probably very much what you're talking about, which is this whole representation of this excess. And in the original painting, there's some bodily excess, I would say, and with Zhdun, it's all about a complete physicality of excess. So I guess I'm trying to have it both ways.
Okay.
All right, and we have a question from Tanya. Thank you, Eliot. Zhdun is non-human, but would you say there is a gender identity tied to this image? Oh, so we sort of talked about this, yeah. We saw examples that featured Zhdun representing female characters, but is there also maybe anything about a particular model of passive masculinity there, especially in the 8th of March poster, but also more broadly, as he is often featured in contexts like politics, football, eating for Russia to win, etc.? Or would you say the weighting he stands for is non-gendered, whereas in the Natasha meme, it kind of is. A woman who lives with 5 cats is also a comment on gender.
Mm-hmm. Well, once anything is assigned the masculine grammatical gender, and it's an animate, presumably animate thing, then the ramifications of gender, I think, are definitely there. Whether or not they're at the forefront is a question. So again, I'm trying to have it both ways, right? I think he's male in the sense of this kind of universal default masculine, but he's also, this is interesting, I think in terms of masculine stereotypes, he's still somehow not the infantilized male that is complained about in certain forums. But what he's more like is in Russia and elsewhere, there's a way in which you have the sort of the man who is all muscle and body and attractive and threatening and dangerous and everything, all that. But the fat man, the very fat man, is just funny, non-threatening. In a sense, the fat man is almost like the gay best friend, right? That is, you hang out with him, he's not gonna hurt you. He's almost desexed as a figure of fun, and so on a spectrum of masculine gender representations, I would put him closer there. But in terms of weighting, though, I personally find it more important that he is not female than that he is male, if you see what I mean. The not being female does more for thinking about the weighting than the fact that he is male. But in a binary gender system, that's where you go.
I think the reason I asked, if I can, I asked before we even addressed the babushka question, so I'm sorry, it's
no.
A repetition in a sense. But for me, he was very much of an Oblomov character, this kind of disturbing, passive male figure, honestly, that also has a tradition in Russian culture in a sense. So I was kind of connecting him to a model of masculinity in a way, which is why
yeah, I felt like there might be also a gender difference between him and Natasha, for instance.
No, absolutely, and yeah, I agree with you. That's why I brought up Oblomov in the end, and probably should have forefronted him more. I mean, the masculinity of Oblomov himself is really a sort of fascinating thing in that, in a sense, if you think of gender as not just binary, but as multiple manifestations of gender, then that book gives you four genders, right, represented by Oblomov, Stolz, Agafia Matvievna, and Olga, right? Or different manifestations of the two genders, right? So that Oblomov, yeah, fits into this whole. This is where, okay, masculinity gets more important. This whole long historical thing of the passive male hero as opposed to the active female. So perhaps if we look more in terms of Oblomov, then maybe you're all right. But those of you who brought this up are right, and that we should be thinking of this more in terms of masculinity. I am willing to completely reverse myself on this because that is fascinating.
Thank you, Eliot.
Also, in the comments, Sasha Novitskaya points out that there's the anti-destigator, the anti-achiever, as a new term. There is an English analog to this means the demotivator. So yeah, I think that's what's going on. That there's the kind of image on there on the internet that is the opposite of the motivational you can do a thing, but more of the here I am just sitting around screwed and nothing's going to work, and oh, my diet's not happening. And actually there are a lot of I should have brought this up. I definitely should have brought this up. There are a lot of Zhdun memes about oh, screw my diet, right? Or I thought this was going to be good for my diet. And I think the reason why is obvious, because Zhdun does not look like a dieting success story. But that too is really interesting, because how often in any context, especially in Russian context, do you see images of dieting and discussions of dieting being focused on men? So yeah.
Oh, anti-destigator, I meant, well, by anti-destigator, I meant that it's not used as it's not a form of meme. It's a self-identification. It's,
oh, that's great.
It's what I've seen. Oh, there are Facebook groups dedicated to, like I don't even know what is it, like collective therapy, perhaps, where burnt out people just go to and complain and whine about how tired they are, about of just everything, of the expectations that they have to achieve, that they have to be the better version or the best version of themselves, and how hard it is. And well, oddly, or maybe not oddly at all, I'd say about 90% of these Facebook groups members are women. Women who feel that it's been too much, and all they want to do is just to be couch potatoes and to stop achieve and to be this anti-destigators, right? Just
that's wonderful.
To stop achieving, just to quit and to live their to live their best life. In that sense, the Zhdun might be actually, or for some it might be a representation of living one's best life.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Let's check out the Facebook group. Of course, somewhere in that entire group, there is someone who is like really overachieving and getting the underachievers together. So there's always a bit of a like someone who's letting her inner Stolz out in the name of all of these female Oblomovs. So yeah. So thank you. I want to look at that.
And we had a question, a little back and forth in the chat. If you want to respond to it, Eliot, would Lebowski be a Zhdun parallel in the Anglophone sphere?
So was it a question or a comment? I'm sorry.
That was a question. Could Lebowski be a Zhdun parallel in the Anglophone sphere?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think we have a long-standing set of character types that overlap with a lot of the Zhdun stuff, which is the stoner. And that goes back to the Stone Fox, of course. So just by being an underachieving stoner and assuming the positions that those stoners are usually in, which is seated or lying down with a beer or a joint in their hands, makes them a lot like Zhdun. Zhdun is a G-rated, wholesome version of that. In what I think, unless I'm mistaken, is the absence of a widespread mass media mainstream representation of the stoner as an option. Whereas in America, this goes back at least to Cheech and Chong. So we have a storied tradition of this. Yeah, but I know what I was going to mention before. I would put sort of triangulating with Zhdun and Big Lebowski. The third and Russian context I would put him in would be the Mitki, because the Mitki, the sort of how to describe them, artistic movement in Leningrad in the 70s and 80s, where people were. It was a lifestyle that was whose ethos was very much about being gentle, right? There's a gentleness about the Mitki that I think fits in well with the Zhdun. I could almost imagine the Zhdun having been created by the Mitki, though that was not exactly the case. So there are local contexts that I think work here besides Oblomov.
One thing that you might think about related to that, that I don't know, I turned off my video. Well, it's probably for the rest. I wonder, I was just wondering again, maybe you addressed this in some of the other lectures, and I haven't been able to go to all of them, but have you sort of said anything about the usage of memes and the construction of self and personal identity? This is maybe related to the question about emotions. That's what I always think about when you talked about Zhdun being sort of like a comfort animal, an image that tends to either for the person posting the meme or for the people viewing the meme, create like a sort of calmer emotional tenor. I wonder if you talked about that with regard to the users of memes at all, because one of the things that's interesting and tricky about memes that I remember you mentioned in the beginning is that they're sort of both, they imply both an in-crowd and an out-crowd, right? You have like the people who don't get what the meme means, isn't even funny if everybody gets it, but because it spreads on the internet, it can't be underground in the same way that like the Mitki were underground, right? So in terms of constructing a self by using certain memes and maybe trying to sort of cultivate in yourself or in your audience, like a specific sense of self with specific emotional or ideological, intellectual associations, what, like how do memes fit into, sorry, this question is getting overly complicated, but sort of one, how do memes help people create a sense of self? Two, how is that sense of self related to the fact that memes imply both being inside a community and excluded from sort of implicitly the community of people who don't get the meme? And then maybe there's a way to sort of connect that to the way that some of them may or may not be political.
No, that's excellent. I think it makes total sense. And I would say that your second point, in a sense, kind of answers your first point, that the way I understand memes functioning for people, that is the people who consume and create memes, is, it's about creating a self to the extent that that self is positioning itself as part of some sort of community of people, of like-minded people, right? One way of looking, I think, the exchanging a meme with someone and you both get it and like it means that you're part of this interpretive community that goes along with it. But it's also kind of like liking the same obscure band or liking the same song, liking the same anything, but also a sign of a shared sensibility. And so perhaps one of the many reasons that memes have taken off on the internet is that they're a very, very quick way of finding your people online, right? The same way that when we make profiles for whatever, Facebook or God help us, a dating site or something, what we're doing, we're assembling things. These are the things I like, right? And what does it matter why if someone really likes Planet of the Apes movies, is that a an attractive thing, or is that put on the list of never? Is that a deal breaker? These things stand in for other things, and one of the reasons that on these questionnaires and so on and so forth, you supply so many data points of your interests and activities, is that the hope is that all of these things will coalesce to create some kind of identity category that will mean that there's someone else out there who overlaps with you on enough of these points.
Absolutely. Sorry. And I just wanted to say the fact that it's interactive, right? That people not just copy the memes, but that you adjust them a little bit, that makes you more invested in it. This is exactly the way that Daria Hitrova's new book about Pushkin stuff, to try to, make people care about that book, which I don't know if you want to include that, but that's exactly the way that she describes, golden age poetry working, because people would sort of take it and then rewrite it, and then you do like a version of it for some lady's album or and it was like sort of like an inside outside way of defining a certain community, a certain sensibility that was by definition interactive, even though, eventually we had all of these sort of like very official собрания сочинений of like all of the, great poets come out. But it works in, not exactly the same way, but quite similarly, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that makes a great deal of sense. And I think there's a continuity there. I was thinking in terms of a different metaphor that actually doesn't have as much room for the creativity that I think you're right to emphasize, which is that if any of you remember far back enough, you'd see this a lot when you were on dial-up internet, that when your computer was trying to connect to some network online, at some point what was happening was a handshake, a hardware handshake. And if the hands met, that meant that you could, that the connectivity was working. And the metaphor of the handshake is so powerful right now, right? Like, are we ever going to shake hands again? I kind of hope not, personally, but I never quite got the hang of it. But the handshake, you extend your hand, someone else extends their hand. All right, we have a connection. On the level of one exchange of the memes, or one exchange of I like the same thing, that's kind of like a handshake. And then along the way, maybe it's one of those more elaborate handshakes with 10 different things that you can do and play with and all of that. But it's a sign of commonality. It's a point of intersection between two otherwise separate beings that converge at one particular spot. And in the case of the memes, that spot is all the stuff that makes that meme mean something, or makes you find it funny. Because at some point, you come across a meme, you don't understand it, you can go to know your meme, you can go to someone who's a lot younger than you and get it explained to you. And just as it is with a joke, you might say, oh, okay, I get it. But it's too late, right? You got it, but that doesn't make you a member of the community. That just means that you can be an interpreter and take part in conversations, but you're still kind of an outsider.
Thank you.
And we have maybe one last question from Juliana. Do you see any connection between Zhdun and a Russian cultural concept, avos?
Avos. No. I'm trying to think what that connection would be. Maybe if you could elaborate a bit more. Who asked the question?
Juliana, I can unmute you if you'd like.
Yeah, just hold on.
Yes.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much. Hello, I go by Alona. So, avos повезет, avos дождут.
Yeah.
So it's, in Arabic, inshallah, and mañana in Spanish.
Right.
Right. It's very deep. And in my opinion, it might be connected somehow. So I'm interested in your opinion, please.
Sure. So I think the connection could be a common relinquishment of agency, right? Well, I'll wait, see what happens. Maybe something good is going to happen. Maybe something bad is going to happen. But it's kind of in sitting around waiting like Zhdun, and in this idea of a voice, there is kind of a very low-key fatalism of, oh, this is out of my hands. Let's see what happens. My hands are folded in the case of the Zhdun. So I think the underlying thing is passivity.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Sure.
All right, unless anybody has any other questions, I think that's all.
Okay, well, thanks Sasha for running this so expertly. Thanks Eliot for another amazing lecture, and thank all of you for joining us again here on a Friday afternoon. I know this is something we've all grown to look forward to. So Eliot, thank you once again for brightening up this part of everybody's week.
My pleasure. Come back next Friday for Little Big, where I will not be performing the Skibbity Challenge.
And again, just to let you know, on Wednesday, we'll have Ann Lounsbury speaking on Life is Elsewhere at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So hope to see many of you then as well. Take care. Have a wonderful weekend. Hope those of you who are on the East Coast can enjoy the weather. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.